The funeral was a small, somber affair. Just a handful of us gathered to say goodbye to my father, Ted Walton. As I stood there, numb with grief, my mother-in-law, Denise, leaned in close. "Gina, life doesn't wait. You have to start thinking about us now," she said coldly. I fought back tears, my heart aching. Am I not allowed to grieve my father quietly? He was the one person who truly understood me, and now he was gone. After the service, the lawyer approached. "Mrs. Davis, your father left you his house in Brooklyn Heights. It's a quaint but valuable property." My husband Mike's eyes lit up. "Wow, that's incredible. We could renovate it, make it perfect for my parents and us to live together." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. "But I need time. This is all so sudden." Mike squeezed my arm. "Of course, dear. We'll discuss it later." As we drove home, Mike couldn't contain his excitement. Just imagine it. A big, beautiful home for all of us. No more dealing with landlords or mortgages. I stared out the window, my mind swirling. Dad's house was my last connection to him. How could I let it go so easily? In the following weeks, the pressure only intensified. Denise and Frank, my father-in-law, seemed to take every opportunity to criticize me. "Gina, Mike needs more than just chicken thighs. You must do better for him," Denise snapped one night as I served dinner. Frank eyed the meal dismissively. "A cheap steak? After his hard day at work, Mike deserves a proper meal." I bit my tongue, feeling their disapproval like a weight on my shoulders. Mike just shrugged, siding with his parents as usual. Then one afternoon, I came home to a jarring sight: construction vehicles outside Dad's house. A contractor approached me confused. "Mrs. Davis, your husband approved these renovations. We're just following orders." My heart dropped. Renovations? I never agreed to any of this. I stormed inside, confronting Mike. He tried to play it off casually. "It's for the best, Gina. We're making this place our dream home." Tears stung my eyes. "Our dream home? This was my father's house, Mike. How could you do this without even consulting me?" His face hardened. "If you can't accept my parents living with us, then we're through. It's that simple." I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. After everything Dad had given me, was I really going to let his memory be tarnished like this? Clenching my fists, I met Mike's gaze. "I won't be manipulated anymore. This house is about my father's legacy, and I'm going to protect it, with or without you." As I walked out that day, I knew my life would never be the same. But in that moment, all I could feel was a fierce determination to honor the man who had given me so much strength. After walking out on Mike that day, I felt adrift. My marriage was crumbling, and I had nowhere to go. Thankfully, an old friend of my father's, Paul Hendricks, offered me a lifeline. "Gina, you're welcome to stay with me until you get back on your feet," Paul said warmly, ushering me into his modest apartment. As I settled in, Paul's calming presence reminded me so much of Dad. He had been Dad's confidant for years, and now I desperately needed that wisdom. "Paul, what am I going to do?" I asked, feeling the weight of my situation. "Mike has turned Dad's house into a battleground." Paul placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "That house is yours, Gina. No one can take that away from you. We'll figure this out together." Over the next few days, Paul and I pored over documents and legal papers, formulating a plan. My determination grew as the path ahead became clearer. "Your father wanted that house to be a sanctuary, a place of peace," Paul reminded me. "We'll make sure it serves that purpose in his memory." Finally, I was ready to confront Mike and his parents. Paul had secured a meeting at the house, saying it was time for an open discussion about its future. The tension was palpable as Denise, Frank, and Mike arrived. Mike shot me a resentful glare, but I stood my ground, Paul by my side. "You had no right to make those decisions about my inheritance," I stated firmly. "This house is part of my father's legacy, and I have a plan to honor that." Denise's face contorted in rage. "You ungrateful, selfish girl, after everything we've done for you?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "What you've done is try to take control, with no regard for Dad's wishes. Well, it ends now." To my surprise, Mike spoke up, his voice dripping with disdain. "So you're just going to throw us out? Your own family?" "If that's what it takes to protect what's rightfully mine, then yes," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "This is the last time I'll be bullied or manipulated by any of you." Paul stepped forward. "I'm afraid you've left us no choice. We have the legal documentation to take over the property immediately. I suggest you make arrangements to leave." Denise opened her mouth to protest, but Frank silenced her with a defeated shake of his head. As they turned to leave, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. It was over. I had won. In the weeks that followed, Paul and I worked tirelessly to bring my vision for the house to life. We renovated and refurbished, creating a warm, welcoming space that embodied Dad's generous spirit. "He would be so proud of you, Gina," Paul said as we stood in the newly revived garden. "You've turned this place into something truly special." I smiled, feeling the warm breeze on my face. I just hope I've honored his memory and shown the strength he instilled in me. As the grand opening day arrived for the new community center, I knew Dad was there in spirit, surrounding me with the serenity he had always provided. It was the first day of my new life, a life of freedom and peace, just as he would have wanted. In the weeks following my confrontation with Mike and his parents, daily life became increasingly tense. Denise and Frank seemed determined to make me miserable, criticizing my every move. "Gina, Mike needs more than just chicken thighs for dinner," Denise snapped one evening as I served our modest meal. "You must do better for him." I bit my tongue, refusing to engage. But Frank piled on with a dismissive glance at the food. "A cheap steak? After his hard day at work, Mike deserves a proper meal." Mike remained silent as usual, siding with his parents through his passivity. I felt utterly alone, isolated in my own home. The constant barrage of demands and insults wore me down. No matter how hard I tried, it was never enough for Denise and Frank. They seemed hell-bent on dominating every aspect of our lives. One evening, as I cleared the dinner plates, Denise fixed me with a cold stare. "You know, Gina, we're not getting any younger. We'll need to start discussing living arrangements soon." My heart sank. I knew exactly what she was implying, moving into my father's house in Brooklyn Heights. I need more time," I stammered, feeling trapped. "That house means so much to me. It was Dad's." Frank scoffed. "Ted's gone now. It's time to start thinking practically about our future as a family." Mike finally spoke up, his voice laced with irritation. "They're right, Gina. We can't keep putting this off. My parents need a permanent place to live, and that house is the perfect solution." I wanted to scream. How could he be so callous about my father's memory? But I knew any protest would be met with more criticism, more demands. In the following days, the tension only escalated. Denise and Frank seemed to take every opportunity to remind me of my supposed failings as a wife and daughter-in-law. "Did you even dust today, Gina?" Denise would sneer, running a finger along a surface. "This place is a pigsty." Frank would chime in with his own jabs. "No wonder Mike comes home so stressed. This environment is unbearable." Through it all, Mike remained infuriatingly passive, letting his parents dictate the narrative of our lives. I felt like I was slowly suffocating, drowning in their constant belittlement. Finally, one fateful afternoon, I returned home to a shocking sight: construction vehicles outside my father's house. A contractor approached me, confused. "Mrs. Davis, your husband approved these renovations. We're just following orders." My heart dropped to my stomach. "Renovations? I never agreed to any of this." I stormed inside, confronting Mike. He tried to play it off casually, but I could see the smug satisfaction in his eyes. "It's for the best, Gina. We're making this place our dream home, just like we discussed." Tears stung my eyes as I realized the profound breach of trust. "Our dream home? This was my father's house, Mike. How could you do this without even consulting me?" His face hardened, and I saw a glimpse of the true man he had become. Selfish, entitled, devoid of empathy. "If you can't accept my parents living with us, then we're through," he stated coldly. "It's that simple." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. My marriage was a sham, my autonomy stripped away piece by piece. But I wouldn't be a victim anymore. Clenching my fists, I met Mike's gaze with a newfound strength. "I won't be manipulated anymore. This house is about my father's legacy, and I'm going to protect it, with or without you." As I walked out that day, I knew there was no turning back. But for the first time in years, I felt free, ready to reclaim the life my father had wanted for me. After I stormed out of my father's home in a fit of anger, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the city streets. The crisp night air provided little solace as I grappled with the profound betrayal I had endured. Mike's callous disregard for my feelings had cut me deeply. Eventually, I made my way to Paul's apartment. the one place I felt I could find refuge. As I stepped inside, a wave of calm washed over me, a momentary escape from the turmoil raging within. I sank into the familiar comfort of his worn armchair, allowing the anger and hurt to slowly subside. In that moment of quiet, I found myself haunted by the sickening realization that my husband had so brazenly violated my trust. How could he have authorized such drastic changes to Dad's cherished home without my consent? The sting of that betrayal burned fiercely, fueling my indignation. As the hours ticked by, I pictured Mike's smug satisfaction as he oversaw the destruction of that sacred space, the desecration of Dad's memory. My fury mounted as I imagined his callous disregard for my feelings, his selfish disrespect for all that Dad had left me. The man had no shame, no regard for the sanctity of that connection to my father. In that moment, I resolved to sever that final tie to him, to cut that last cord binding me to his contempt. I would not allow his arrogance to further defile Dad's legacy, to strip me of that precious link to the man who had given me so much. I would reclaim my dignity, my self-respect, by severing that final thread. With a renewed sense of purpose, I rose from the chair, determined to preserve that last remnant of my father's spirit. I would not permit Mike's callous disregard to taint that final bond, that last connection to the man who had nurtured me, who had shaped my character. I would not allow his scorn to further diminish my sense of self. With a steadying breath, I made my way to the small alcove where I kept my few cherished possessions from Dad. There, nestled in a worn leather case, was the small token of his affection, the simple memento of his love, the antique fountain pen he had given me on my 16th birthday. I grasped the smooth, polished surface, feeling the familiar curve of the nib against my fingertips, and began to chronicle my resolve, my determination to preserve that final connection to the man who had meant so much. In the days following my confrontation with Mike, I found myself adrift, untethered from the life I had once known. The decision to leave my husband had been agonizing, but I knew in my heart it was the only path forward. I could no longer subject myself to his manipulation, his blatant disregard for my autonomy. As I settled into the modest apartment Paul had offered me, I felt a strange sense of calm amidst the turmoil. This space, though unfamiliar, represented a clean slate, a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, free from the toxic influence of Mike and his overbearing parents. Yet, even as I sought to move forward, the sting of Mike's betrayal lingered. The image of my father's house, that sacred space now defiled by his selfish renovations, haunted me. How could he have so callously disregarded my wishes, my connection to Dad's memory? In those quiet moments alone, I found myself wrestling with a burning sense of injustice. Mike had not only violated my trust, but had trampled upon the very essence of what Dad had left me, a sanctuary, a place of serenity and refuge. His actions had desecrated that final link to the man who had shaped me, who had instilled in me the values of integrity and respect. As the days turned to weeks, that simmering indignation began to crystallize into a fierce determination. I would not allow Mike's selfish ambitions to rob me of my father's legacy. That house, that cherished space, belonged to me, and I would reclaim it no matter the cost. It was during one of my frequent visits with Paul that the pieces began to fall into place. As we pored over the legal documents surrounding the inheritance, he placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Gina, this house is yours, and yours alone. No one, not even Mike, can take that away from you." His words resonated deeply, reigniting the spark of defiance that had been smoldering within me. I met his gaze, my jaw set with newfound resolve. "You're right, Paul. It's time to protect what my father entrusted to me, to honor his memory in the way he would have wanted." From that moment on, a plan began to take shape. With Paul's guidance and unwavering support, I would navigate the legal intricacies, building an ironclad case to wrest control of the house from Mike's grasp. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, confrontations that would test the very limits of my resilience. But I was ready, fortified by the knowledge that I was fighting for something greater than myself. A sacred bond with the man who had given me life, the man whose values had shaped the core of my being. As I looked ahead to the impending battle, a sense of clarity washed over me. This was about more than just a house. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my self-worth. I would emerge from this crucible stronger, tempered by the fire of my convictions. And when the dust finally settled, I vowed that house would stand as a testament to my father's legacy, a beacon of resilience and unwavering love, shining through the darkness that had once threatened to consume me. In the weeks following my decision to leave Mike, I found solace in the company of an unexpected ally, Paul Hendricks, one of my father's oldest friends. As I settled into the modest apartment he had offered me, Paul's calming presence reminded me so much of Dad. "You know, Gina, your father spoke of you often," Paul said one evening as we sipped tea in his cozy living room. "He was immensely proud of the woman you've become." I felt a lump form in my throat at the mention of Dad. "I just wish he could see me now, Paul. I feel so lost without his guidance." Paul reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on mine. "Ted may be gone, but his spirit lives on in you. And that house he left you? It's a part of his legacy, his final gift." My thoughts turned to the Brooklyn Heights home, now tainted by Mike's selfish renovations. A pang of sadness washed over me, quickly replaced by a simmering anger. "That's just it, Paul. Mike has desecrated everything Dad stood for with that place. He's turned it into a battlefield, all for his own gain." Paul's eyes narrowed, a determined glint flickering behind his glasses. "Then we'll take it back, Gina. That house belongs to you, and no one can take that away." In the days that followed, Paul and I pored over legal documents, meticulously building a case to reclaim my inheritance. With each strategy session, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a fire igniting within me. "Your father trusted you with that home for a reason," Paul reminded me. "It's time to protect what he entrusted to you, to honor his memory in the way he would have wanted." Those words resonated deep within me, echoing the same resilience and strength that Dad had instilled from an early age. I was my father's daughter, imbued with his unwavering spirit. As our plan took shape, I found myself channeling that inner fortitude, drawing strength from the memories of Dad's unwavering love and support. This was about more than just a house. It was a battle to preserve his legacy, to ensure that the values he had imparted would endure. Finally, the day arrived for our first legal maneuver, a formal letter demanding that Mike and his parents vacate the premises immediately. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as Paul and I made our way to the house, each step fueled by a sense of righteous determination. When Mike answered the door, his expression quickly shifted from confusion to outright contempt. "Gina? What is this nonsense?" I steeled myself, meeting his gaze with an unwavering resolve. "This nonsense is me taking back what's rightfully mine. You had no right to make those decisions about my inheritance, Mike. This house is a part of my father's legacy, and I won't let you defile it any longer." As the words left my lips, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The shackles of Mike's manipulation, of his parents' toxic influence, began to loosen their grip. Mike's face contorted in anger, but before he could respond, Paul stepped forward, brandishing the legal documents like a sword. "I suggest you heed this notice, Michael. We have taken all necessary steps to ensure Gina's rightful claim to this property. Any further resistance will only compound the consequences you face." In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was prepared to fight with every ounce of my being. This was about more than just a house. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my self-worth. And with Paul's steadfast support, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, emboldened by the knowledge that I was honoring my father's most sacred gift. With Paul's steadfast support and guidance, the wheels were set in motion to reclaim what was rightfully mine, my father's cherished home in Brooklyn Heights. Yet, even as our legal strategy took shape, I knew the true battle would be far more personal, a confrontation I had been both dreading and anticipating. It was Paul who suggested we arrange a family dinner at the house, a final opportunity to resolve the matter civilly before escalating our efforts. Though apprehensive, I agreed, recognizing that this might be my last chance to appeal to whatever shred of decency still resided within Mike and his parents. The tension was palpable the moment they arrived, their expressions a mix of confusion and thinly veiled contempt. Denise, ever the antagonist, wasted no time in voicing her displeasure. "Just what is the meaning of this, Gina?" she sneered, her eyes narrowing. "We don't have time for your games." I took a deep breath, steadying myself as Paul gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "This is no game, Denise," I stated firmly. "You all had no right to make those decisions about my inheritance. This house is a part of my father's legacy, and I have a plan to honor that in a way he would have wanted." Mike scoffed, his disdain evident. "Your plan? Don't be ridiculous, Gina. This is our future we're talking about." "No, Mike," I countered, my voice unwavering. "This is about preserving what my father entrusted to me, what he wanted to leave behind for generations to come." Denise's face contorted in rage, and for a moment I thought she might explode. "You ungrateful, selfish girl, after everything we've done for you?" I felt Paul tense beside me, but I remained resolute, drawing strength from the memory of my father's unwavering spirit. "What you've done is try to take control, with no regard for Dad's wishes," I stated, meeting Denise's fiery gaze. "Well, it ends now. This house will become what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary, a place of peace and community, just as Dad envisioned." Frank, ever the passive observer, opened his mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, silencing him. "I've already taken the necessary legal steps to assume full ownership of this property. Any further resistance on your part will only lead to consequences none of us want." Mike's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched in barely contained fury. "So, you're just going to throw us out? Your own family?" I matched his stare, unflinching. "If that's what it takes to protect what's rightfully mine, then yes, this is the last time I'll be bullied or manipulated by any of you." An uneasy silence fell over the room, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, it was Denise who broke the tension, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "How dare you? After everything we've sacrificed for this family?" Paul stepped forward, his presence commanding respect. "I'm afraid you've left us no choice. We have the legal documentation to take over the property immediately. I suggest you make arrangements to leave." For a moment, it seemed as though Denise might unleash the full force of her fury, but Frank placed a hand on her arm, silencing her with a weary shake of his head. As they turned to leave, Mike lingered, his gaze filled with a potent mix of resentment and defeat. "You'll regret this, Gina," he spat venomously. "Mark my words." But as I watched them depart, I felt no regret, only a profound sense of relief and vindication. The shackles of their manipulation had finally been severed, and I was free to chart my own course, to honor the legacy my father had bestowed upon me. In the days and weeks that followed, Paul and I worked tirelessly to bring my vision for the house to life. We renovated and refurbished, creating a warm, welcoming space that embodied Dad's generous spirit and love for community. And as the grand opening day arrived, I knew Dad was there in spirit, surrounding me with the same serenity he had always provided. This was more than just a house. It was a living, breathing testament to his values, a sanctuary where his memory would endure for generations to come. The day of the grand opening arrived with a sense of nervous anticipation. As I stood in the newly renovated garden, taking in the vibrant blooms and meticulously landscaped paths, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride and accomplishment. This space, once tainted by Mike's selfish ambitions, had been transformed into a living embodiment of Dad's spirit, a sanctuary of peace and community, just as he would have wanted. The countless hours of hard work, the battles fought and won, had all led to this moment. "You've outdone yourself, Gina." Paul's warm voice broke through my reverie. He moved to stand beside me, his eyes shining with pride. "Your father would be in awe of what you've created here." I felt a lump form in my throat, overwhelmed by the weight of Dad's legacy. "I just hope I've honored his memory in the way he deserved, Paul. This place means everything to me." Paul placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Have no doubt, my dear. You've turned this house into something truly remarkable, a living testament to Ted's generous spirit." As the first guests began to arrive, I felt a surge of nervous energy coursing through me. This was it, the moment I had fought so hard for, the culmination of a journey that had tested the very limits of my resilience. Yet, as I greeted each visitor with a warm smile, I was struck by the overwhelming sense of community and camaraderie that permeated the air. These were Dad's people, the neighbors and friends, who had embraced his kindness and compassion over the years. One by one, they approached me, offering heartfelt congratulations and sharing cherished memories of the man who had touched so many lives. Your father was a true gem, Gina, Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor, said with a misty-eyed smile. He always had a kind word and a helping hand for anyone in need. Mr. Rodriguez, the local grocer, chimed in with a hearty laugh. Remember when he organized that neighborhood cleanup day? Ted had us all out there bright and early, picking up trash like a bunch of kids on detention. As the anecdotes flowed, I found myself transported back to the simpler times of my childhood, when Dad's unwavering presence had been the bedrock of my world. Each story, each recollection, was a precious thread woven into the tapestry of his legacy. As the day wore on, the garden became a vibrant hub of activity, filled with the laughter of children and the warm embraces of old friends. I moved among the crowd, basking in the joy and sense of belonging that Dad had always fostered. It was in those moments that I truly understood the profound impact he had made, not just on my life, but on an entire community. This place, this sanctuary, was a living embodiment of his values: generosity, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to bringing people together. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the garden, I found myself standing in a quiet corner, taking in the scene with a sense of profound gratitude. Dad's spirit was alive and thriving here, a testament to the power of one man's unwavering love and compassion. Dad, I hope you're proud, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. This is for you, a legacy that will endure for generations to come. And in that moment I could have sworn I felt his presence, a gentle breeze caressing my cheek, carrying with it the familiar scent of his cologne. A subtle reminder that he was never truly gone, but lived on in the hearts and lives of those he had touched. As Paul approached, his eyes shining with pride, I knew that my journey had reached its ultimate destination, a place of healing, redemption, and an unbreakable connection to the man who had shaped me into the woman I had become. You did it, Gina, he said, his voice filled with admiration. You turned this place into something beautiful, a living embodiment of everything your father stood for. And as I looked around at the joyous scene unfolding before me, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same resilience and grace that Dad had instilled in me. For this was his true legacy, a gift that would continue to nurture and inspire long after I was gone. I pulled up to the house I had called home for over 30 years, and my heart sank. The familiar colonial-style facade was gone, replaced by sleek modern lines and a fresh coat of gray paint. A massive for sale sign stood defiantly on the perfectly manicured lawn. "Dennis, what's going on? I didn't authorize this!" I exclaimed as he emerged from the front door, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Relax, Maggie. You should have been here. Now it's out of our hands," he replied dismissively, waving a hand towards the renovated property. My mind raced, trying to process the jarring changes. This was my family's home, filled with memories and history. How could he make such drastic decisions without consulting me? As I stepped inside, the gut punch intensified. Gone were the warm, familiar tones and furnishings I had carefully curated over the years. In their place, a stark, minimalist design that felt cold and unwelcoming. "Mom's been a godsend overseeing the whole project," Dennis said, his tone almost mocking. "She knows what's best for us." There she was, my mother-in-law Joan, surveying the transformed space with a self-satisfied smirk. "It was time for an update, Maggie. This place was stuck in the past, just like you." Her words stung, but I bit my tongue. After months of caring for my ailing parents, I didn't have the energy for another battle with Joan's passive-aggressive jabs. "Where are my things?" I asked, dreading the answer. "We had to make room for the new look," Joan replied dismissively. "Don't worry, we kept a few sentimental pieces in storage." Storage? My stomach churned at the thought of my cherished belongings, collected over a lifetime, carelessly packed away. As I wandered through the hollow, unfamiliar rooms, an overwhelming sense of betrayal washed over me. This was no longer my home. It was a staged set, stripped of warmth and soul. In the kitchen, I found Dennis poring over paperwork with a young, attractive woman I didn't recognize. They looked up, their expressions a mixture of surprise and guilt. "Maggie, you're back early," Dennis stammered. "This is Sarah, our realtor. She's been invaluable in getting the house ready for market." Sarah extended a perfectly manicured hand, her smile saccharine sweet. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Margaret. Dennis has told me so much about you." I forced a tight smile, my mind reeling. Ready for market? They were selling my family's home without my consent? As Sarah droned on about staging and curb appeal, I tuned her out, my gaze fixed on Dennis. His eyes averted mine, and in that moment, I realized the depth of his deception. This wasn't just about the house. It was a calculated betrayal, orchestrated by Dennis and enabled by his ever-controlling mother. A cold, sinking feeling gripped me as I recognized the true extent of how little they valued my input or respected my place in this family. I had been naive, blind to the cracks forming in the foundation of my life. But now, the veil had been lifted, and I saw the harsh reality staring back at me. This was no longer my home. It was a battlefield, and I would have to fight to reclaim what was rightfully mine. I sat numbly on the edge of the bed in the guest room, my mind replaying the events of the day like a broken record. How could Dennis do this to me, to us? After 30 years of marriage, of building a life together, he had thrown it all away without a second thought. As the shock began to subside, a familiar ache settled in my chest, the dull ache of disappointment I had grown accustomed to over the years. I should have seen the signs, the subtle shifts in his behavior that I had chosen to ignore, desperate to cling to the illusion of the perfect family. Dennis had always been distant, more focused on his work and hobbies than on cultivating our relationship. But I had foolishly believed that was just his way, that deep down he still loved and cherished me. Now the truth was laid bare. I had simply been a convenient accessory in his life, easily discarded when something shinier came along. And Joan, my own mother-in-law, the woman who should have been my closest ally, had been the architect of this betrayal all along. Her constant belittling, her snide remarks about my capabilities as a wife and mother, they had all been carefully calculated jabs, chipping away at my self-worth until I was too broken to fight back. Tears stung my eyes as I remembered the countless times I had defended her to my own family, making excuses for her behavior. She's just old-fashioned, I would say. She means well, deep down. But the truth was, Joan had never accepted me as part of her family. To her, I was an interloper, a threat to the twisted, codependent bond she shared with her son. The sound of laughter from downstairs snapped me back to reality. Dennis and Joan, celebrating their victory over me, no doubt reveling in the spoils of their deception. My fists clenched involuntarily, a surge of anger replacing the sadness that had consumed me moments before. I thought of my parents, the way their faces had lit up when Dennis and I had first brought them to this house, our forever home. They had trusted him, believed in the life we were building together, and now their legacy, the home they had gifted us out of love, was being sold off like a piece of merchandise, all for Dennis's selfish gain. A renewed sense of determination washed over me. I would not let them win. Not this time. Rising from the bed, I began to gather my things, my mind already formulating a plan. First, I needed evidence, proof of Dennis's misdeeds that not even Joan could deny or spin in her favor. Then, I would rally my troops, the friends and family who had stood by me through thick and thin, the ones who had always seen through Joan's false pretenses. This was war, and I would fight with everything I had to reclaim what was rightfully mine, my home, my dignity, my life. Dennis and Joan had made the mistake of underestimating me, of believing I would simply roll over and accept their betrayal. Well, they were in for a rude awakening. As I zipped up my suitcase, a small, defiant smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to show them just how strong I could be when pushed to my limits. This was only the beginning. I stared at the suitcase on the bed, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts and emotions. Part of me wanted nothing more than to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the toxic web of lies that had ensnared my life. But another part, the part that had been beaten down and gaslit for years, hesitated. Could I really just walk away from everything I had built? A familiar voice in the back of my mind whispered insidiously, "This is your fault, Maggie. If you had been a better wife, a better daughter-in-law, none of this would have happened." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to drown out the voice that sounded eerily like Joan's. That wretched woman had spent decades chipping away at my self-worth, always quick with a backhanded compliment or subtle jab about my shortcomings. And Dennis, my so-called partner, had stood idly by, letting her toxic influence fester until it had poisoned our entire relationship. Flashes of memory assaulted me, moments I had tried so hard to forget. Joan criticizing my cooking at family dinners, her thin lips curled in a perpetual sneer. Dennis brushing off my concerns about her behavior, insisting I was overreacting, the way she had swooped in like a vulture when my parents fell ill, insinuating that I was an ungrateful daughter for needing to care for them. "If you cared enough about your own family, you wouldn't leave for months, Maggie," she had said, her voice dripping with false concern. At the time, I had bitten my tongue, too overwhelmed by the situation to stand up for myself. But now the memory ignited a spark of defiance deep within me. How dare she question my devotion to my family when she had spent years actively undermining and sabotaging my relationships? I thought of my parents, their faces etched with worry as I had left to tend to their recovery. They had trusted Dennis, believed that he would support me through that difficult time. Little did they know, he had used my absence as an opportunity to further his own selfish agenda, aided and abetted by his manipulative mother. A renewed sense of determination washed over me. I would not let them win. Not this time. If Dennis and Joan wanted a war, then a war they would get. Zipping up the suitcase with a decisive tug, I squared my shoulders and headed for the door. There would be no more running, no more hiding. It was time to gather my troops and fight for what was rightfully mine. My home, my family, my life. As I descended the stairs, I could hear Joan's shrill voice echoing from the kitchen, no doubt berating Dennis for his latest failure. A small, grim smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. They had no idea what was coming. I paused at the bottom of the stairs, taking a deep breath to steady myself. Then, with a newfound sense of purpose, I strode towards the kitchen, ready to face my adversaries head-on. No more Mrs. Nice Maggie. It was time to take back control of my life, no matter what it took. I strode into the kitchen, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and determination. There they were, Dennis and Joan, seated at the table like a pair of co-conspirators, their expressions a blend of smugness and disdain. Well, if it isn't the prodigal daughter-in-law," Joan sneered, her thin lips curling into a familiar sneer, "to what do we owe the pleasure of your presence?" Before I could respond, Dennis cut in, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have no idea what we've been through, managing everything you abandoned." He gestured broadly at the newly renovated space around us. "We had to take matters into our own hands." I felt my hands ball into fists at my sides as I surveyed the changes they had made to my home. Our home. Gone were the warm, inviting tones and cherished family heirlooms I had carefully curated over the years. In their place, a cold, sterile aesthetic that felt utterly devoid of personality or sentiment. "Where are my things?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. Joan waved a dismissive hand. "We need to move on, Maggie. This house isn't yours to hold us back any longer." Her words hit me like a physical blow, and in that moment the full weight of their betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. They had not only disrespected me, but they had desecrated the very legacy my parents had entrusted to us, the home they had gifted us out of love and trust. Rage bubbled up from deep within me, a primal, visceral fury that I had never experienced before. How dare they? How dare they trample on everything that was sacred, everything that had once been so precious to our family? "You had no right," I seethed, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. "This was never just your decision to make." Dennis scoffed, leaning back in his chair with an infuriating air of nonchalance. "Don't be so dramatic, Maggie. It's just a house. We're doing what's best for our future." "Our future?" I echoed incredulously. "Or yours, Dennis? Yours and that little tramp you've been sneaking around with?" His eyes widened, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of fear cross his features. Joan, however, remained unmoved, her expression hardening into a mask of cold indifference. "So you figured it out," she said coolly. "I must say I'm surprised it took you this long. You were always a bit slow on the uptake, weren't you, dear?" Her words were like a slap in the face, but I refused to let her see how deeply they stung. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and met her icy gaze head-on. "It's time you realized, Maggie, that you were never truly part of this family," she continued, her voice laced with venom. "You were always an outsider, a mere accessory to be tolerated for Dennis's sake." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. The years of subtle jabs and undermining, the way they had so easily cast me aside the moment I became an inconvenience, it had all been part of their twisted game, a slow, methodical erosion of my sense of self-worth and belonging. But no more. I would not be their victim, their punching bag, any longer. "You're wrong, Joan," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "This family, this legacy, it's mine just as much as it is yours, and I'll be damned if I let you destroy it for your own selfish gains." Dennis opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him with a single withering glare. "Don't bother, Dennis. The lies end here. I know everything. About your affair, about the way you've been squandering my inheritance to fund your mistress's little business ventures. It's all going to come out, one way or another." For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in Joan's eyes, a crack in her carefully constructed facade of indifference. She knew, deep down, that I had finally found the strength to fight back, and that terrified her more than anything. A small, triumphant smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. The battle lines had been drawn, and for once I held the upper hand. This was only the beginning of their reckoning. The smug looks on Dennis and Joan's faces quickly faded as the weight of my words sank in. I could see the fear flickering in their eyes, the realization that I was no longer the meek, compliant woman they had grown accustomed to controlling. How did you find out?" Dennis sputtered, his bravado crumbling under the intensity of my gaze. "Did you really think you could keep it all a secret forever?" I scoffed. "The shady financial dealings, the late nights at the office, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out." Joan's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin, disapproving line. "So you've been snooping through our affairs, have you? How typical of you, Maggie, to resort to such underhanded tactics." I leveled my gaze at her, refusing to be cowed by her condescending tone. "Don't try to play the victim here, Joan. You're just as guilty as Dennis in all of this." Turning to my husband, I felt a surge of disgust and betrayal rise up within me. "How could you do this to me, Dennis? To our family? After everything we've been through together, how could you throw it all away for her?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them, the hurt and anger I had bottled up for so long finally spilling over. Was I not enough for you? Did our marriage, our vows mean nothing to you? Dennis opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "No, don't bother trying to explain it away. I know all about your little fling with Sarah, the real estate agent you've been using to funnel my inheritance into her business ventures." Joan's eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of genuine surprise cross her features. Clearly, even she hadn't been privy to the full extent of Dennis's deception. "That's right," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I know about the shady deals, the secret accounts, all of it. And I have proof." Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a thick manila envelope, stuffed with financial records, copies of incriminating emails, and other damning evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the past few weeks. You see, while you two were busy plotting behind my back, I was doing a little digging of my own. And what I found was a web of lies and betrayal that goes deeper than I ever could have imagined. Dennis's face had drained of color, his eyes darting nervously between me and the envelope in my hands. Joan, however, remained stubbornly defiant, her chin jutting out in a show of false bravado. "So what?" she sneered. "You have a few pieces of paper. That doesn't change the fact that you were never truly part of this family, Maggie. You were always an outsider, a mere accessory to be tolerated for Dennis's sake." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they stung. Instead, I met her gaze head-on, my resolve unwavering. "You're wrong, Joan," I said, my voice steady and resolute. "This family, this legacy, it's mine just as much as it is yours, and I'll be damned if I let you destroy it for your own selfish gains." A heavy silence hung in the air, the weight of my words settling over us like a thick fog. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had frozen, the three of us locked in a silent battle of wills. Then, without warning, Joan's composure cracked. Her face contorted into a mask of rage, and she slammed her fist down on the table with surprising force. "How dare you?" she spat, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? With accusations and threats? I held her gaze, unflinching. I'm not threatening anyone, Joan. I'm simply stating the facts. And the fact is, you and Dennis have betrayed me in the worst possible way. But it ends here, today. No more lies, no more secrets. Turning to Dennis, I felt a pang of sadness mixed with resolve. I loved you, Dennis. Truly, I did. But this... I gestured around the cold, sterile room that had once been our warm, inviting home. This is too much. You've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. His eyes pleaded with me, silently begging for forgiveness, but I had made up my mind. There was no going back, not after everything that had happened. It's over, I said, my voice heavy with finality. The life we had, the dreams we shared, it's all gone, Dennis, and you have no one to blame but yourself. With those words, I turned and walked away, leaving them to stew in the wreckage of their own making. It was time to start anew, to rebuild my life on my own terms, without the constant weight of their manipulation and betrayal holding me back. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, a sense of liberation washed over me. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt truly free, and I would savor every moment of it. The weight of Dennis and Joan's betrayal hung heavy on my shoulders as I left the house that had once been my home. But even in the depths of my anger and hurt, a newfound sense of determination burned within me. I would not let them break me, not after everything they had put me through. My first stop was the storage unit where Joan had so carelessly stashed away my belongings. As I rifled through the haphazardly packed boxes, a wave of emotion washed over me. These weren't just material possessions. They were pieces of my life, memories and mementos that had been so callously discarded. Gently, I lifted out a faded photograph, its edges worn and creased from years of handling. It was a picture of my parents on their wedding day, beaming with joy and hope for the future that lay ahead of them. A lump formed in my throat as I traced the outline of their faces, my heart aching for the trust they had placed in Dennis, a trust he had so thoroughly shattered. Tucking the photograph safely into my bag, I continued my search, unearthing more treasures from the past. Old love letters from Dennis, souvenirs from our travels, even the tattered stuffed bear he had won for me at a carnival on our first date. Each item was a poignant reminder of the love we had once shared, a love that had been slowly poisoned by Joan's insidious influence and Dennis's own selfishness. But amidst the pain and heartache, a newfound sense of resolve took root within me. These mementos were not just reminders of what I had lost. They were proof of the life I had built, the sacrifices I had made, and the strength that had carried me through even the darkest of times. With a renewed sense of purpose, I began to gather the evidence I would need to expose Dennis and Joan's lies. Financial records, incriminating emails, anything that could shed light on the depth of their betrayal. As I pored over the documents, a clearer picture began to emerge, one of greed, manipulation, and utter disregard for the sanctity of our marriage. It was then that I knew what I had to do. I would not simply walk away and lick my wounds. No, I would fight back, rallying the support of those who had stood by me through thick and thin, those who had seen the truth of Dennis and Joan's actions long before I had been willing to open my eyes. One by one, I reached out to my closest friends and family members, laying bare the painful truth of what had transpired. And one by one, they rallied to my side, offering not just their sympathy, but their unwavering support and loyalty. I always knew there was something off about that woman, my oldest friend Beth spat, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. Just say the word, Maggie, and I'll make sure the whole town knows what kind of snakes they really are. Others echoed her sentiments, sharing their own stories of Joan's manipulative behavior and Dennis's increasingly erratic actions. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and suddenly the pieces all fell into place. I've been naive, yes, I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. But underestimating me is their biggest mistake. As the days passed, my network of allies grew stronger, each person bringing their own unique perspective and insights to the table. Together we pieced together a damning portrait of Dennis and Joan's misdeeds, a tapestry of lies and deceit that would be impossible to ignore or refute. And through it all, a newfound sense of strength and resilience took root within me. I was no longer the meek, downtrodden woman who had allowed herself to be controlled and belittled for far too long. No, I was a force to be reckoned with. A woman who had reclaimed her power and her sense of self-worth. As I looked around at the faces of those who had rallied to my side, I felt a surge of gratitude and determination. This was no longer just about me. It was about standing up for what was right, about refusing to let the toxic influence of people like Joan and Dennis poison the lives of others. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and turned to face the battle ahead. It was time to take the fight to them, to expose their lies and their betrayal for all the world to see. And this time I would not be silenced or cowed. This time I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. As I stood before the gathered crowd of family and friends, a hush fell over the room, all eyes fixed on me with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies fluttering in my stomach. "I know there have been rumors circulating, whispers of discord within our family, and today I'm going to lay bare the truth, no matter how painful it may be." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but I pressed on, undeterred. For too long I've been a victim of manipulation and betrayal at the hands of those closest to me. My own husband, Dennis, and his mother, Joan, have conspired against me, trampling on the sanctity of our marriage and our family for their own selfish gains. Gasps of shock and disbelief echoed through the room, but I refused to falter. This was my moment, my chance to reclaim the dignity and respect that had been so cruelly stripped away from me. "It's true," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Dennis has been carrying on an affair with a younger woman, using my own inheritance to fund her business ventures behind my back." Turning to face my husband, I felt a surge of righteous anger coursing through my veins. "How could you, Dennis? How could you betray everything we built together, everything we sacrificed for this family?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I silenced him with a single, withering glare. "And you, Joan," I said, shifting my gaze to my mother-in-law's stony expression, "you were supposed to be my ally, my support system. Instead, you enabled and encouraged Dennis's betrayal, driven by your own twisted, possessive love for your son." Joan's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a familiar sneer. "How dare you speak to me like that, you ungrateful little—" "Enough," I thundered, cutting her off mid-sentence. "I've endured your insults, your belittling, for far too long, but no more. This house, this legacy, it isn't yours to destroy. It's my blood, sweat, and tears you've trampled on, all for your own selfish desires." A heavy silence hung in the air, the weight of my words sinking in for all to bear witness. I could see the shock and disbelief etched on the faces of those around me, the realization that the perfect family they had envied was nothing but a carefully constructed facade. "I have proof," I continued, holding up the thick manila envelope that contained the damning evidence of Dennis and Joan's misdeeds. Financial records, emails, photographs, all of it documenting the depths of their betrayal. Slowly, I began to circulate the documents, allowing each person to see for themselves the ugly truth that had been hidden for so long. Whispers and gasps of outrage rippled through the crowd, and I knew in that moment that the tide had turned. Dennis stepped forward, his eyes pleading with me for forgiveness. "Maggie, please, let me explain." But I cut him off with a sharp shake of my head. "There's nothing to explain, Dennis. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." Turning back to the crowd, I drew myself up to my full height, a newfound sense of strength and resolve coursing through my veins. "This is not the end," I declared, my voice ringing out with conviction. "This is just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I reclaim my dignity, my self-worth, and my rightful place in this family." A smattering of applause broke out, growing louder and more fervent as the weight of my words sank in. I could see the respect and admiration in their eyes, a stark contrast to the pity and condescension I had grown so accustomed to. In that moment, I knew that I had won. Not just a battle, but a war against the toxic influences that had sought to diminish and control me for far too long. As I looked around at the faces of those who had rallied to my side, I felt a surge of gratitude and pride. This was my family, my true family. The ones who had seen me at my lowest and still believed in me, still stood by my side. And as for Dennis and Joan, their downfall was inevitable, a consequence of their own selfish actions and misguided priorities. They had lost far more than just their reputations. They had lost the respect and loyalty of those who had once looked up to them. But I had gained something far more precious, my freedom, my self-respect, and the knowledge that I was truly loved and supported by those who mattered most. As I stepped down from the podium, a weight seemed to lift from my shoulders, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and determination. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, unburdened by the chains of manipulation and deceit that had held me captive for far too long. This was my moment, my chance to start anew and rebuild my life on my own terms. And as I looked towards the future, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and possibility. After all, the best revenge is living well, and that's exactly what I intended to do. The aftermath of my public confrontation with Dennis and Joan was both exhilarating and exhausting. As I stepped out into the crisp evening air, I could feel the weight of years of pent-up anger and resentment finally lifting from my shoulders. "Maggie, over here!" I turned to see Beth waving me over, a broad grin splitting her face. She enveloped me in a fierce hug, her eyes shining with pride. "You were incredible in there," she said, giving my arm a gentle squeeze. "I've never seen you so strong, so confident." A small smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. I'll admit, it felt pretty damn good to finally stand up to those two. Beth nodded emphatically. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting for you to see them for who they really are. That mother-son duo has been nothing but trouble from the start." Her words rang true, and I felt a pang of regret for all the years I had spent making excuses for their behavior, turning a blind eye to the toxicity that had slowly poisoned my life. "Well, no more," I said firmly. "That chapter of my life is over. It's time for me to start fresh, to rebuild on my own terms." Beth beamed at me, her expression a mixture of admiration and relief. "I'm so proud of you, Maggie. You've come such a long way from the woman who used to let Joan walk all over her." I nodded, my mind drifting back to those dark days when Joan's constant belittling had left me feeling small and insignificant. But now, in the wake of my public triumph, I felt a newfound sense of strength and self-worth. "I've learned that true family stands by you, not controls you," I said, squeezing Beth's hand gratefully, "and I'll never let anyone walk over me again." As the weeks passed, I found myself reconnecting with old friends and family members who had rallied to my side during my darkest hours. Their support and encouragement buoyed me, reminding me that I was far from alone in this new chapter of my life. And as for Dennis and Joan, well, let's just say the aftermath of their exposed misdeeds was far from pretty. The once revered family name had been dragged through the mud, their reputations in tatters. I would catch glimpses of them around town, their expressions sullen and defeated, as if the weight of their own actions had finally caught up to them. But I refused to let their downfall consume me. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, one piece at a time. I reclaimed my cherished belongings from storage, carefully restoring the warmth and familiarity to the house that had once been my home. And slowly, steadily, I began to heal. Not just from the betrayal, but from years of emotional abuse and manipulation. It wasn't an easy journey, of course. There were moments when the pain and anger threatened to overwhelm me, when the temptation to wallow in bitterness was almost too strong to resist. But each time I would remind myself of how far I had come, of the strength and resilience that had carried me through the darkest of times. And as the months passed, something remarkable began to happen. The whispers and sideways glances that had once followed me gradually faded, replaced by nods of respect and admiration. It seemed that my public stand against Dennis and Joan had struck a chord with others who had suffered in silence, and my story had become a beacon of hope for those trapped in their own toxic situations. "It's good to see you back, Maggie," an old acquaintance remarked one day as I passed her in the grocery store. "Stronger than ever." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. "Thank you. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned that true strength comes from within, and from surrounding yourself with people who truly care about you." As I made my way home, my arms laden with bags of fresh produce and the promise of a new recipe to try, I couldn't help but marvel at how far I had come. The woman I was today was a far cry from the meek, downtrodden soul who had once allowed herself to be defined by the cruelty of others. No, I was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had reclaimed her power and her sense of self-worth. And as I looked towards the future, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility that had been absent for far too long. This was my life, my story, and I was the author of my own destiny. The road ahead might be long and winding, but for the first time in years, I felt truly alive, unburdened by the weight of others' expectations and manipulations. As I stepped through the front door and into the warm embrace of my newly reclaimed home, I couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning, the first chapter in a story that promised to be filled with adventure, growth, and the kind of hard-won wisdom that can only come from surviving the darkest of storms. And I couldn't wait to see what the future had in store.